Good afternoon. My name is Jess Sweeney, and I'm happy to welcome all of you on behalf of the Collegium Institute, which serves the University of Pennsylvania, and Dappled Things, a quarterly of ideas, art, and faith. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our wonderful co-sponsors for this event who helped us spread the word. Thank you to Image Journal, Ignatius Press, Lumen Christi Institute, Durham University Center for Catholic Studies, the University of St. Thomas Masters in Catholic Studies in Minnesota, Catholic Artists Connection, Nova Forum for Catholic Thought, and Wellspring, a Mother Artist Project. Thank you to all of you for your help with this. As I said, my name is Jess Sweeney, and I'm the director of the Collegium Institute's Ars Vivendi Arts Initiative, which aims to create a conversational space to explore the relationships between beauty, faith, and the arts, probing their importance to human culture and to a life well lived. The initiative seeks to integrate artistic craft and practice with an understanding of the intellectual life behind the creative mind, exploring questions like what is beauty, why do we have this impulse to make, where do art and faith meet? Too often, discussions of art and beauty become abstracted and intellectualized. So while this initiative does look at the ways in which philosophy and theology interplay with the arts, its aim is to keep the core focused on the practice of art making. Today, we gather for a special conversation titled The Work of the Hands, the Ordinary and Divine in Contemporary Art. As I was thinking about this event, I was thinking and looking at my 5-month-old and seeing how babies are just fascinated with their hands. They just stare at them, then begin to move them slowly, quickly, oddly, with wonder in their eyes, a discovery, a mystery to them. They touch and grab and pull and grip. Our hands, our sense of touch, helps us to move and navigate through the world and find our place in it. And sometimes this bodily sense of touch can pull us elsewhere, towards a memory, towards a glimmer of something beyond us. And since the time of cave dwellers and nomadic peoples, it seems we have dealt with this reality through the process of making, dipping hands into red ochre and leaving our marks on walls, crafting ashen drawings of bulls and horses. We human creatures are bound up in the tension between the earthly and the heavenly, the bodily and divine. As Augustine says, we carry our mortality about with us. We often catch glimmers of the glory to come. And this tension, I would say, is at the core of our art making, our impulse to create from the time we can hold a crayon to the soaring heights of Antoni Gaudi's Sagrada Familia. We are pulled and fueled by this impulse to make, to brush and mold and carve and illuminate and thread. We are makers. And this making doesn't happen in a void. Antoni Gaudi noted that, quote, originality is a return to the origin, and that the artist is a discoverer of the world around him, not so much a creator. And so artists are shaped and molded by their environment, be that the mountains or trees outside their windows, or the children crawling around the studio, as well as by their place in history, in a tradition. When one paints a garden, it has the potential to hold many gardens and might jog that in the mind of their viewer, from Klimt's Kiss to Monet's Woman in a Garden and Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe, to perhaps Bruegel's Eden and Jan van Eyck's Adam and Eve and Millet's Annunciation. Likewise, a fiber artist holds within her practice and work of art the practices of immense and other minuscule tapestries, both liturgical and domestic, as well as the weight of many weavers and makers who've created beauty by binding together wool and thread and needle. And so today, we'll explore these questions of making, of sacramentality, of materiality, the earthly and divine, the natural world and creation. And to do so, we'll be joined by 4 artists whom I'll introduce to you briefly before I hand off the screen to each of them for some opening remarks. So first, I'd like to introduce, like I said, each of you. So we have Caleb Kortokrax. He is a figurative artist living and working in Baltimore, Maryland. He writes that his work is an exercise in unlearning and relearning how to see, and that it builds bridges between disparate painting traditions and time periods. From Trump wheel depictions of Romanesque architecture to dreamlike but photorealist depictions of his children, His aim in combining past and present visual signals in his studio process is to reanimate the painted image. He received his MFA from MICA in 2014 and has exhibited widely around the country. We'll also be hearing from Matilde Olivera, who is a sculptor and painter from Madrid, Spain. Her interest for realism led her to search for ways of learning the traditional techniques and improving her skills with master artists at places such as Florence Academy of Art and Angel Academy of Art in Florence. Her work primarily focuses on religious subjects or liturgical spaces, but even when not explicitly speaking of the spiritual, through things like her landscapes and portraits, she is also trying to reach for this ultimate beauty, a way of satisfying our spiritual thirst. After that, we'll be hearing from Daniel Mitsui, who is an artist specializing in meticulously detailed ink drawings made entirely by hand on paper or vellum. His works are held in collections worldwide. A graduate of Dartmouth College, he studied drawing, oil painting, etching, lithography, wood carving, bookbinding, and film animation. He desires to make art that is faithful to tradition, yet strikingly original, and vigorously medieval in spirit. A poet as well as a prolific designer of typefaces, patterns, and ornament, he lives in Indiana with his wife and their 4 children. And lastly, we'll be hearing from Kara Patrowicz, who is a fiber artist based in Maynard, Massachusetts, with her husband and 2 young children. Her work has been exhibited throughout the US and abroad, and she was a Fulbright grant recipient in painting to Ireland. Informed by her BFA in oil painting, her approach to wet felting is a process of slow looking and developing layered, nuanced surfaces as a form of active contemplation. She also writes that the restorative, embodying aspects of blending tactile fiber materials are also central to her practice. So without further remarks, I'd like to pass things off to our panelists. So we'll be hearing from Caleb Kortokrax first. So Caleb, if you can take over. Thanks.
Hello, welcome everyone. Greetings from Baltimore, Maryland. Again, my name is Caleb Kortokrax. I am a painter, primarily an artist, and I'll just give some brief remarks. I'm going to show some images, a really quick brief overview of some recent work and a tiny bit of the past. I have wanted to be an artist since I was a little boy, I would say. I was quickly drawn to images and doodling and drawing my favorite things as a little boy. And I think my interest in art has a few themes that have been consistent since I was young up until even today. One of the most consistent things for me that drives my work is interest in human perception. I'll give you a really brief story why I think this really kind of solidified in my life. When I was 11 years old, I was actually shot in the eye with a BB gun. And for the better part of a year, I couldn't see out of my right eye. I had an eye patch on, couldn't see anything. And so I quickly realized the benefit of humans having 2 eyes and binocular vision. And so you can't catch things very easily when you only have 1 eye. And you realize all these things about vision, having only 1 eye for a time. So for me, human perception and vision has been a constant in my work. I'm also very interested in color and atmosphere, also the figure and the idea of space and existing in space, and ideas of literal space and also illusionistic space and the tension there. So also, I'm gonna share my screen now. Let's see here. There we go. So I also want to just talk briefly about my relationship to tradition. Like Jess had said, I really feel strongly of a sort of artist not living in a bubble, but being tethered to the tradition of making. And for painters, that's easily taken for granted that there's so many things that we are, and techniques that we're using, materials that we're using, and ways of building images and engaging in them that comes from past generations. So for me, I find a lot of deep meaning, a lot of purpose in almost knowing that I'm in communion with past generations of artists. So I'm going to look at a few images. This first one here, let's make sure I got that out of the way, is from 10 years ago. This is 2013 when I was in grad school. This is a good example of the kind of work I was doing and how I was formed as an artist. I had a fantastic professor, an undergrad at Valparaiso University in Northwest Indiana, named Sarah Jancy. She really encouraged me to paint from life, to use my eyes, and to not paint from photography. And I really took this to heart. I ran with it and became so in love with the process because it made me feel very alive. It made me feel so connected to the present moment. So this painting here was painted of, this is a painting of my wife, Katie. It was painted over about the course of a month. And this is at a time when we were first married, had time to, she had time to sit for paintings for children. So let me go to the next slide. Here's another example of having someone sit for me, a friend, Delaney, sitting for a painting. These, I'm also playing with color. So this, I have a warm light source in the image, and the warmth of this image comes from, I actually illuminated the painting with a very cool light source, and I matched the colors. So I had to compensate for the coolness of the light on my surface. And so that made all the mixtures quite warm, which I was interested in this effect happening in like film. And here's the reverse of that, where I had a very cool light source on the model and using a very warm light source on the painting as I'm working in the workspace on the palette. So I'm color matching, but compensating for a difference in color temperature. So those of you who are familiar with photography might be aware of this. So that transition, I'm going to talk about kind of two bodies of work, and this is the beginnings of a second body of work that goes away from just working with a figure and painting, just trying to paint figures from life. This is it's the reverse of a painting. I had set up a painting in the studio and put this sort of red cellophane to it. So it's doing a lot of things simultaneously. It's also a bit of a self-portrait. So you'll notice you can see my reflection, my silhouette in the center of the image. Also, I'm using this technique that had a lot to do with vision and measurement for me, where I have a grid, a string grid over top of the surface of the setup. And then I have those exact same strings wrapped around the painting itself. And it becomes a sort of delineation of the surface, and using the grid. It also is a tool for speeding up the drawing process. But I really was drawn to this sort of scarring of the surface, that when you remove the strings, it leaves evidence of the actual making of the painting. Another image doing this sort of thing. Again, there's a self-portrait element to it, but also this is referencing Rublev's Trinity icon, the central figure of the Trinity. And the blue space is actually the shape of the robe of the Christ figure in that icon. So a sort of meditation on seeing yourself or seeing Christ and others, seeing Christ in yourself became a jumping off spot for this, but also playing a lot with color palettes. Here's this another image. I want to intersperse some of these images of just in progress, so you get a sense for how these are made, not just seeing the final painting, but actually seeing them in the studio. Around this time, I was also, so this beginning, this second body of work that is still kind of continuing to this day, of images that are really compositional and really color-based. I started out, this is the first of this series that I was titling just Passage 1, Passage 2, Passage 3. And I really was drawn to color and wanting to like make color happen in the work, play around with color palettes, and really pushing this idea of flatness in an image, but also believable illusionistic space in an image, and letting that tension do a lot in the image, and making the painting in a very different way. So I'm also at the same time looking a lot at illuminated manuscripts. So some of this imagery here is coming from old psalters, particularly Romanesque psalters, that had like strange depictions of stars or brickwork, ways that things are illustrated. So much so, I was interested in this process that I thought I need to actually just make some large paintings based explicitly off of illuminated manuscripts, which I'm going to show a few images that I really don't have floating around online. But I took these images from the St. Albans Psalter, the Magi cycle portion of the Psalter, where it's showing the journey of the Magi and their narrative in the Gospels. And I created these pretty large paintings of this 5-panel scene, very much playing with the color palette, changing into this sort of bright nightscape, very vivified color space, you could say. But I don't know. I still don't know what to do with these. They relate to my work, but that's where my headspace was when I was doing these. This I'm looking at like a Romanesque altar, and changing it quite a bit, simplifying it. And again, this gives you a sense how the painting is made. I basically create a little sculpture first. You could call it a maquette or a diorama. And then I make a very one-to-one painting of that sculpture on the wall directly next to the painting. Though I still had this desire to have imagery in these paintings. So I started playing around with putting, for instance, this is a Mary from the Sagrada Familia, the Holy Family with Saint Anne, the El Greco painting, and I absolutely adore this depiction of the Blessed Mother. So I was playing around with this. It led me to like really wanting figures back in the work after doing this for a while. So I realized I was using my iPhone, just taking photos with my phone as a sort of painterly device or a sketching device. And so I thought, I'm playing with these materials and making dioramas. I'm going to actually just start printing these out and making collages, and then painting those collages and it would feel like I'm painting from life, have that same kind of strong sense of visual engagement and being present in the process of making that painting. So this is a painting. I don't have time to really get deep into these, but I'm going to breeze through some of these to show you. Very much like a collage with this trompe-l'oeil effect of drop shadows. Now I'm getting into some paintings, newer paintings. This is from 2022, recently. And here you can see I'm very much taking cues from art history. So this, I'm thinking of Vermeer and this sort of figure in a space, almost as if she was standing in front of a window. This is my daughter right before bedtime, getting ready for bed. And she was sitting there drawing, actually. But it totally looks like woman in a window reading a letter, or, Vermeer composition. Very much interested in pattern and color interplay. And so these are just some detail shots to give you a little bit of a sense of the materiality. I really love paint to build up heavy on the surface, even to run off the edges in a pretty intense, bold way. So here's another example of this, playing around a bit with the doubling effect on the edge as well. Maybe hinting at this is not just a straight looking, that's mediated looking through iPhone, and printing these images off and making paintings from those. So This is an image of my daughter, my second daughter, Cecily, homesick one day. Okay, this is what I'll end on. I want to just show you some of these recent images. I'm continuing this body of work, working on what I'm calling these as cloisters. And I think for me, it's the idea of a cloistered space, or the idea of not a cloistered space, but rather a cloister, of an actual cloister that you'd find like on the side of a cathedral or something where there's a sort of center courtyard with plant life, or a lawn and an architectural space surrounding it. So I started making these just looking at a lot of imagery of Romanesque churches, and wanting to kind of hint at this idea of an architectural space, but then infusing into that a really intense atmospheric light condition. So letting the color happen from the idea of an atmosphere. I'm looking at a lot of Fra Angelico. This is specifically an exact duplicate of the architectural space of his Annunciation painting. So you get hence Hanging Fog, these titles where they're coming from different ideas. And here's these in the studio again to give you a sense of how these are made. The little maquette directly next to the painting, and creating a very one-to-one painting. So I'll end some last thoughts before I pass the baton, is that I think for me, and stop my screen share. For me, I think that art has this ability to sort of tap into a space that is a bit timeless. It's where the past and the present and even the future can kind of collide while you're working. You have this, it almost feels like this peace comes over me specifically when I'm working, that I feel like I'm kind of connected to past artists. I feel like I'm making an object that's probably very much going to outlive me. And I'm engaging with objects that have outlived the people, the past artists who have made them. So there's something really deeply spiritual, almost liturgical about that. And I think it relates a lot to this sort of idea, even when you're in mass or you're in prayer or in a church, just a physical church, actually, that's say an old cathedral that's been there forever. You can enter into that space and feel like you're stepping out of normal time. You're still present in time, but you're stepping into a sort of expanded sense of time where you feel the past of, say, 1,000 years of people praying in a cathedral, and you feel like you can touch that wall. It's almost got this sponge that has soaked up these prayers. Art can do something like that too, where it is sort of you tap into this energy that's outside of time, or heaven and earth are sort of colliding in this weird way. So with that, my opening remarks, I will conclude and pass the baton off to Matilde. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caleb, and thank you, Jess, for having me. I would like to begin by explaining briefly how over the years, I have come to understand some aspects of art and how it works, especially in the light of faith and also in relation to the topics that Jess proposed to us for today's conversation. So there is this aspect of art that particularly interests me, and that is that there is an almost sacramental character in the work of art. So in the Catholic Church, you know that we define sacraments as effective signs of grace. So sacraments are visible rites that signify and make present God's grace. That means that God uses what is sensitive, what the senses can capture. He uses matter, in short, to make present his life and communicate it to us. So I was thinking, I've always understood this. So in a certain sense, can be said that art has a sacramental dimension, because art uses material realities such as colors and shapes and sounds to make present realities that are not tangible themselves. So art has that ability to make the invisible visible. Among other things, I believe that is why art is such an appropriate medium to express the truth of faith. And in the history of Christian art, especially due to the iconoclast crisis, the Eastern Church developed an entire theology about the image. And I am not an expert on this, but I know that in the East, the icon is understood as much more than just a representation of Christ or the saints. So the icon has a sacred character because in some way it participates in the reality of the saint whom it represents. So it acquires an almost sacramental quality. And I really like this Eastern way of understanding the icon. And I wonder if the true scope of a work of art is to be like an icon, a sort of window or bridge that leads us to a reality that is beyond the image itself. And well, at least I know that that's what I would like my artwork to be. And I do believe that art really has this mission. It's a mission like of revealing. Auguste Rodin, the French sculptor, which I admire very much, said that the mission of the artist consists of understanding the world and making it understood. He also said that the artist has a special gaze that is capable of penetrating the truth that lies inside the forms, and that the beauty in the work of art depends directly on how much truth the artist has been able to capture in his work. So for him, there is this direct relationship between truth and beauty that I completely share. And in my case, I also add a supernatural vision that identifies that truth and beauty with God. And it is at this point where matter becomes important, because matter is the meeting point, the place where communication between God and man takes place, especially after incarnation. So in art, it happens that through the transformation of materials, the artist creates new works that participate in the truth and the beauty of both the materials themselves and of that which they represent. And as we know, the argument by which the issue of iconoclasm was settled was the mystery of the incarnation. And I have found a quote by St. John Damascene in the 8th century, refuting the iconoclasts. He says this: "You look down upon matter and call it contemptible. This is what the Manichaeans did, but Holy Scripture pronounces it to be good, for it says, and God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. I say matter is God's creation and a good thing. It is not matter which I adore. It is the Lord of matter, becoming matter for my sake, taking up his abode in matter and working out my salvation through matter. For the Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. It is evident to all that flesh is matter and that it is created. I reverence and honor matter and worship that which has brought about my salvation. I honor it not as God, but as a channel of divine strength and grace. Was not the thrice blessed wood of the cross matter? And the sacred and holy mountain of Calvary? Was not the holy sepulchre matter? The life-giving stone, the source of our resurrection? Was not the book of the Gospels matter? And the holy table which gives us the bread of life? Are not gold and silver matter, of which crosses and holy pictures and chalices are made? And above all, is not the Lord's body and blood composed of matter? And he goes on. But I just think this is beautiful and wanted to share it. And also I think it does have a special relationship with how artists perceive matter and how we use it for our creations. And this is what I wanted to talk about next, about how each material with its own qualities influences the creation of the work of art. So I'm going to talk about this from the point of view of sculpture. Could you share the screen now and show the images I sent you? Thank you. So in my case, I like to respect the very nature of the materials that I use and let them express what they are. So for example, this image was modeled with clay. Then I made a cast in plaster. But as you see, I like to leave the traces left by the modeling sticks or the fingers. I do not try to hide the malleability of the clay, but just the contrary, I'm interested in making it evident. I like to make all those marks and incisions and show all this texture. In the next image, here we go. This is another example. You can see that it is also modeled in clay and then cast in plaster. And although I can give some areas a more finished look, such as Mary's face, in all the figure you can see all the marks and the gestures of the process. So I really like the process to be seen. And also when I model with clay, I have to choose another material that will be the definitive one, because I don't have an oven, so I cannot bake the clay. And I like plaster because it has very similar qualities to the clay. It is also a humble material, it is malleable, it hardens when it dries, and so on. And sometimes when you know that the definitive material will be something different, like bronze, that affects the way in which I model, because the final sensations that bronze will give the sculpture are so different. In the following image, which is also modeled in clay and cast in plaster, I decided to add some polychromy. So the choice of pigment and color and how to play with that in the surface of the sculpture has to do with this, recognizing the qualities of the materials and trying to use them to add expression. And I think that when you respect the nature of each material and use it as an enhancer of that expressiveness, there is also a certain reverence towards the material itself and a desire to reveal the sacred eloquence of the pigment itself. These are words of a Spanish author called Juan Plazaola. I really love them. Reveal the sacred eloquence of the pigment itself. And I believe this is part of what a work of art can reveal, the goodness and the beauty of the material itself, going back to what I previously read about St. John Damascene. And the same happens with stone. So we'll go to the next image. In fact, there are two, so you can feel free to switch from one to another. There are two different views of the same sculpture. So each type of stone is different and expresses different things. Alabaster, this is alabaster. So for example, it is a soft stone. It is translucent and it lets light pass through. And in its natural state, it presents on the outside a series of formations with mud. And also sometimes in the interior, you can see like these veins that make kind of drawings in the inside. And I like all this to be seen and help convey what I had imagined. This piece belongs to a series of alabaster sculptures of plants. And alabaster just seemed appropriate to me to convey the delicacy of the leaves and their translucent nature. So the material determines the theme, and the theme the material. So I think the two things must be coherent. You can show the next and last image. Maybe, yeah, there you can see some of the translucency of the stone. It's difficult to take photos of that though, but you can see the untouched pieces of the surface with some mud still there. And just to finish, I would like to quote a line from Juan Plazaola. This is a Spanish writer that I quoted before, just for you to think about. He says, "The artist investigates the simple elements of the material world because in them he searches for the imprint of the creator's modeling fingers." Thank you very much. Now I will pass it on to Daniel Mitsui.
Okay, is my screen up? Hello. Great. Good morning. As was mentioned in the introduction, my specialty is ink drawing. I tend to draw at a fairly small scale, and the majority of my work is religious in its subject and devotional in its purpose, and takes most of its inspiration from medieval art, particularly illuminated manuscripts. And is my video not up? Anyway, my interest in medieval art is I don't really think of it as a historical style. Particularly Gothic art is what I'm interested in. I don't think, well, I like this because it's old, or I like this because it comes from Northern Europe in the Middle Ages. I like it because there is a principles underlying it that I think are enduringly true. Things that I think, because they are enduringly true, they can be useful in the present day. And I think of my materials sort of in the same way. I use them because they are effective. Like calfskin, for example, is my preferred drawing. If you want to show my full screen, I've got a picture here of this. This is something I'm working on now. And I'll bring that back up in case you haven't seen it. I like it because it is precise. It is a very good material for drawing. It's not something that I think of as like a reenactment, or, I'm trying to use period materials. And like I said, I don't really think that sacred art has, a historical center, or a golden age that exists within human history. I think that it has, I would describe it, instead of as a center, as two foci, sort of like you would see in an ellipse, like a planetary orbit. And one of those foci corresponds to tradition, which is, the foot of the cross. It's the public life and revelation of Jesus Christ that is handed down then as memories, perpetuated in liturgical means, through theological means, through art as well, and that endures through history. And the other focus corresponds to beauty, and I would say that is the Garden of Eden. And this idea that the experience of beauty has to do with the Edenic experience was really well expressed by Saint Hildegard. She wrote an epistle to the prelates of Mainz, and when she laid out sort of a theology, for her it was music, but I think it's applicable to all sorts of beautiful forms, where she said that the experience of life in Eden before the fall was Adam's voice was so beautiful that a mortal being of our kind couldn't even endure it. And that this experience of a completely beautiful experience that we had then, it endures as sort of like a distant memory in us in the fallen world. And when we take delight in beautiful things like music and art, it's because we are feeling that sort of half-remembered dream, that distant echo. And so when I think of that, I think that the task of making sacred art is to try to, as much as possible in a fallen world, to work toward that. So I don't like it when, sometimes people will say, well, we want to have, a standard for religious art and make that, say it's Rublev's icons or it's Gregorian chant, and this is the standard against which everything is measured, because I understand that you want good art instead of bad art, but the gap between bad and good to me is much smaller than the gap between good and what we are striving toward, which is something we can never really realize in the fallen world. But we should always be trying to improve, to think of the historical forms as things that we're trying to, bring back to God, to a standard that's much higher than us. And so we can never really be content with them. And so I think that is how I approach the idea of making traditional art, but also trying to enrich its possibilities in terms of what sort of subjects I put in it, what sort of styles I draw upon for inspiration, and also how I use the materials. So you can show the next slide then. This is an example of something that I've done that's very much in a more of a strict historical style. This is drawing on Celtic art, and if you go to the next one, it's a bit of an experiment in a Japanese style. This is more like Yoshitoshi, but I'm drawing the second dream of Saint Joseph. And I like doing these in order to learn how to do these different approaches. But if you go to the next one, more of a hybrid approach is what I really, really enjoy doing. This is a Sacred Heart drawing, and it's, it draws upon medieval imagery, but if you look at, for example, there's the animals in there that have symbolic meaning. There's platypus, there's pangolins, there's chameleons, things that wouldn't have been known if this were actually like a 15th century drawing. And there's a certain Japanese influence in the treatment of the lines and the shadows, or lack thereof, really. And in terms of the materials, like this was drawn on Japanese paper. It was, there's gold leaf on here. There's palladium leaf. Palladium leaf would not have been available before, like, say, the 18th century, because platinum group metals weren't discovered then. But it's superior to silver leaf because it doesn't tarnish. And so I'm trying to basically use whatever I can to its best effect in order to try to communicate the ideas that underlie these works of art. And an example, if you go to the next slide, this is another one that has I'm drawing on bits of Celtic art, bits of Islamic art, in addition to all of the medieval influences. Something I want to mention here is that my work, because it's on a small scale, sometimes I don't like the fact that everything is computerized now means that you sort of lose the objective size of things, because you can just like zoom in or blow it up. You can project it on a big screen or on a miniature little phone. Whereas this is, when I approach this, I very much want to say this is something that's about 5 inches wide. And when you have these little details in here that show the, like these little rosary beads, those are only about 1/2 inch wide. And so you don't draw the same way when you're doing something that tiny. You have to make it more of like a cartoon. The hands are going to be bigger, the faces are going to be bigger, because that's how you can communicate in so small of a space. And I try very hard to find ways to make sure that the artwork that I make is not really just reducible to data, because there's sort of the old adage is that to a man with a hammer everything looks like a nail. I think that nowadays to a man with a scanner everything kind of looks like a JPEG. And so, like, yes, I scan these things and put them on the internet for publicity and marketing, but I want to make sure that when I look at this as my artwork, I don't want people to just think of it as the scan. And so I like using properties of it that can't be reduced that way. And one of those is the translucency of the calf skin. I don't know if you could show me the full screen, but it's like you can see through it pretty well. And something that is, I think, very interesting about that, which wasn't really done historically, is to draw on both sides in order to make a drawing that looks differently depending on whether it is lit from the front or lit from the back, or what angle you're seeing it at. I don't have a good two-sided one right here with me now, but I think the next slide shows an example of what that looks like. And it's something that you have to sort of see as as the object itself. It can't just be, yes, like that's Christ at the door. And if you go to the next slide, it shows the back where if you hold it up to the light, you see these wood grains, fossils, different colors, things like that. That's just one way that I'm trying to make sure that this stays real. It's an actual object that was made by human hands. And I don't know that I could articulate why that feels so important on a theological level, but I do feel that part of the problem, just spiritually and aesthetically in the present day, is that we're just sort of awash in a lot of fakeness and artificiality. And I feel that art should really try to work against that. So I think my time's close to up, but if you want to just scroll through the next few slides, they demonstrate this same principle. That's a drawing shown from front, back, and then front and back with lighting behind it. The next two, I think, just show side by side some of the effects that I'm bringing out in terms of the damask, the colors. And in this case, I'm drawing the creator, the creation of Adam. And so to show that it's a pre-incarnate second person of the Trinity here, who does not have flesh yet, I'm drawing on the backside to create sort of an effect of being able to show a figure that does not at this point have a body. So there's sometimes and also the skulls in the tree of the forbidden fruit. So there's symbolic aspects behind that and not just visual ones. Right. So I think that I will hand this to Kara now. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Daniel. If you want, you could bring up those images that I'd sent as I get started. So as Jess mentioned earlier in the talk, I work in fiber art, felting, weaving, embroidery. You could describe what I do as painting with wool. This piece here, it's called Parallel Play. It looks a little bit pixelated. The file might have been too large, but this is needle felting with wool and dryer lint and bits of fabric. My subject matter comes from my daily life as a mother, primary caregiver, homemaker, and you could go to the next slide. Here's a detail of a large piece. I'm seeking authentic beauty in the tender rituals and messiness of parenting. The detail, this is it's all wool that's been layered. Everything in front of you right here is made of wool that's been dyed different colors. As you can see, my style looks somewhat impressionistic. You can go to the next image. This is a detail of the earlier piece. I'm influenced by many artists. Mary Cassatt is a classic one, but also specifically a group of post-impressionist painters called the Nabi. Artists like Bernard Vuillard and Maurice Denis, who interestingly was a devout Catholic. You could go to the next image. And this is a large piece. It's called Playtime Hand. My hand emerges from the bottom of the piece. This is very large. It's about 4 by 4 feet. And I created this using needle felting and wool. And in my talk, I'm going to touch briefly on art making as pilgrimage, prayer, and sacrament, but all these things overlap, of course. So wool felting, people are always asking me what this is, so I'm going to try to describe it as best I can, and I have a PDF you can bring up that will have some images to show the process. This is another piece. So wool felting is an ancient method of producing textiles. It's a process that blends and compresses animal fibers, typically sheep's wool, into a matted piece of fabric or a sculptural form using needle tools or hot water and soap and agitation, rolling the felt over and over. It's very hands-on. Here I have some images of wet felting. I'll start with layering wool, almost like painting on a canvas, develop an image like you can see in the second picture. And there's a lot of wool. In the third image, you could see that's probably a few inches high of layered wool. You could go to the next one. I cover it with mesh. I saturate it with hot water and olive oil soap and begin agitating the fibers and rolling and rolling. And then you can continue to the next one. And as it felts and flattens, it becomes a piece like you see in the last image. This is based on a view of my husband's reading chair. Typically, once I've felted as much as I can, I rinse it and let it dry, and then I will go back in with needle felting to create areas of clarity. You could go to the next slide. And refine different areas. This is a finished piece, and I apologize, these are pixelated, but areas are more refined. And in this one, there's my husband's chair. There's a little bit of a bucket seat coming into the lower right corner, one of our kids' toys. And then the next slide. So everything I just described is a process called felting. There's also dry felting or needle felting, where you use, again, wool, needle tools. I have a felting pad, and barbs on the needle help to mesh the wool together and mesh the wool with the fibers underneath. So it's a similar effect, but it's a different process, using needles to blend the fibers. Okay, and I think that's all the images I have. So you could bring it back to me. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's gone to Daniel. Well, I'll continue. There are different origin stories about the creation of the process of felting, depending on the culture or region. My favorite origin story has to do with pilgrimage. The sheep used to shed their wool, it wasn't sheared, and the tale goes that European pilgrims stuffed their shoes with the wool that they found on the side of the road to soothe their aching feet. And the rain, sweat, and friction of walking felted the wool into a cushion. And this resonates very much with my experience of my creative process and the idea of art as a balm or a source of solace and difficulty in everyday crosses. I recently heard this quote about the spiritual life, and this connected with my feelings about my earthly art materials, my process, my lay vocation as a wife and a mother. Your ordinary contact with God takes place where your fellow men, your yearnings, your work, and your affections are. There you have your daily encounter with Christ. It is in the midst of the most material things of the earth that we must sanctify ourselves, serving God and all mankind. And this is a quote from Saint Jose Maria Escriva. I see the creative process akin to praying with materials, praying with my hands, a form of active contemplation and a pursuit of beauty. Pope Benedict the 16th described it beautifully in one of his addresses as the arrow of beauty that wounds man. that the experience of beauty may be sweet and it may be painful. There is joy and suffering united in the experience. And in making work, I'm responding to materials in the touching, the shaping, attunement to unexpected color palettes or textures or imagery. I find that when I feel like I make a discovery, often it's very simple, just a form emerging that I hadn't planned for as I'm working. To me, it feels like a moment of encounter with the Holy Spirit, like a moment of encounter you may have in prayer. And these encounters, I believe, happen in the making, but I also hope others experience them in the receiving and the viewing of the work. I literally pray at the beginning of each time I'm in the studio, usually the Come Holy Spirit prayer. I try to wrap up with a prayer of gratitude, usually as I'm dashing out the door to get my kids. These things are all very intertwined, I feel. Playfulness is an important part of my process too, to feel that there's a freedom to explore different avenues in my work, a sort of serious play, like a child really invested in building something with Play-Doh or drawing for hours or building. My son creates these incredible towers out of Legos and Magnetiles. There's something that really inspires me about that. When I start new work, I do preparations with drawings, making studies of different materials. I have photo references, but as I work, I have a heart for the unexpected, kind of looking for where the Spirit leads, if I can pray to follow him. And the importance of playfulness was described beautifully by Thomas Burton in a letter to another hero of mine, Jacques Maritain. In these days, you should be carried by him toward your destination and do what you do more as play than as work, which does not mean that it is not serious. For the most serious thing in the life of a Christian is play. The seriousness of Christian play is the only genuine seriousness. It is like the book of Tobias, that beautiful book about God's play in the life of man and in the troubles of man. All life is in reality the playing and dancing of the child God in his world, and we, alas, have not seen it and known it. And he wrote this in 1963, and I feel like it's very relevant today on many levels. And while play is important to me, so is cultivating my craft, exploring new ways to use materials, to hone my technical skills, seeking mentorship, and to pursue a sort of humble mastery of my materials, a habit of art as described by Jacques Maritain in his essays in Art and Scholasticism. And I don't want to mistake, I think as we each grow in our spiritual lives, to know that can aid in the growth of our work, and then at the same time, the importance of developing skill and craft in tandem. Flannery O'Connor had a wonderful quote that I will end with. The fact that the materials of the fiction writer are the humblest. Fiction is about everything human, and we are made out of dust. And if you scorn getting yourself dusty, then you shouldn't try to write fiction. It's not a grand enough job for you. So I see this as a reminder to just get into the nitty-gritty of craft, get into the earthly, simple, ordinary ways of making work and being inspired. And I'll wrap up there because I know I'm at my time.
Thank you so much, Kara. If all of you want to come back on the screen, just to flag for all of you in attendance here, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, that we'll have time now for, we'll have some conversation amongst the 5 of us, and then also time for Q&A. So if questions are already arising for you, or as we're continuing conversation, you can feel free to send those questions in. At the bottom of your screen, find a little Q&A option there, and you can send questions there to any of the panelists, or to, you know, a kind of general question as well for various so thank you all of you for those opening remarks. I have lots of things sort of going on in my mind now because of them, and I think I want to sort of I think something that tied all of you together, and I think actually the Flannery O'Connor quote does a really nice job of bringing that out, that sort of idea of the earthly, the humble, the dust, but in which there's a way in which, like, that's where the kind of beauty emerges, right, in all of these sort of ways of making. And I wanted to see if we wanted to sort of kind of dive into that a little bit more, and maybe also thinking about the quote from Gaudi, this idea that man does not create, he discovers. So I'm wondering kind of what role discovery plays in your process. It's kind of a question for all of you. So I don't know if maybe we want to start with Matilde or Caleb, but whoever wants to jump in first, feel free.
Yeah, okay, so I do think that that's true in my work. So what I was talking before, the choice of the material, so you discover its properties and how those properties speak about, you know, that they express things. So you choose that, and you discover how a certain stone, say, is transparent, or if it's hard, or all those qualities, you discover them and you use them, and you build the work using that.
Yeah, I totally relate to that, discovering materials performing certain weird ways. Oil paint is what I primarily work with, and sometimes pigment is extremely transparent and also extremely potent, and others are very dull and very opaque. And so playing with the reality of the materials to create sort of illusionistic moments in them is like the beauty of physical painting. And I totally relate to what Daniel was talking about, the frustration of like translating that into a JPEG that you see it, but like I love the fight against that, and like I'm just gonna do drawings on the back of drawings because that's impossible to experience you know, digitally, which you know, this is the beauty of like going into a museum and seeing things in real life, as you encounter this material thing in front of you that an artist stood in front of and actually manipulated these materials and made something that you get to stand in front of and feel present with, and almost time travel through that. This idea of being able to, you know, it's beautiful. I love it.
You know, I think that probably of the artists here, I work in maybe the most forgiving materials. Just drawing doesn't really doesn't push back at you really in the way that sculpture or painting do, and I've some experience in both. So I'm working with the materials that are relatively obedient, especially drawing on capskin. It's much easier actually than drawing on paper in ways, because it's so easy to make corrections and things. So I think I focus more of my idea of discovery on the sort of research aspect of it. I'm working in mostly traditional sort of idiom, and I find that when it comes to figuring out these symbols, correspondences, just significant compositions or ways of treating space and light and things, that a lot of this has already been sort of thought out and discovered, or at least sort of implicitly communicated in things like, you know, patristics, in liturgical texts and in a lot of older art. And so I think for me, the discovery process, what I find most interesting is to really delve into, the sacred scriptures and the sacred tradition and the artistic tradition, and really finding so much that's already there that I like to, reinterpret and try to build upon. But most of the best ideas don't really come from within me. They come from something I found. I think for me, it's more of an intellectual process than the physical one that I would relate to that.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying, Daniel, because I feel like the discovery can happen there's so many approaches when it comes to creating meticulous work. Like, there's still so much to find. Like the work I make now, it happens through the material, and that's almost part of why I think I've gravitated to it. I was an oil painter for many years, and as I started to gradually try out fibers, there was just so much that was new to me, and where I was struggling in painting, it kind of helped me that way. But I think I like the Gaudi quote, because I think it also harkens to the idea that we're responding to something. It isn't like a self-created thing, and that response can come to a historical tradition or research or in the making of the work. But yeah, that I love that Gaudi quote. I thought that was, we are creating, but we are also like discovering, because something pre-exists. You discover if something's already there. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's great. And I feel like some of what you're all saying here, I feel also ties a bit to Matilde, your sort of idea about this idea of art being almost like a sacrament, right? The kind of like that sort of bridge or window, and making present what's visible and invisible. And that actually made me think a little bit about, I was curious if you guys could share, if this resonates as a question with you, what sort of role, like viewing other art, both like contemporary artists, but also art historically, and also for some reason my brain is also going to like the role that prayer plays. And I'm wondering, like, that kind of idea that Caleb, you also spoke to, of kind of being in communion with other artists. So I guess I'm wondering what that looks like for you practically, like even like, do you guys find that you need to take in and view the work of others as a kind of like sort of energy and fuel, and also like what role prayer might play in that as well? I don't know if that makes sense as a question, but it's sort of one that came to mind.
No, totally. Yeah, I think that for me, I fell in love with the idea of making through seeing other people making art, and a few of you also touched on that as well. But for me, I remember specifically when I was a little boy, and my grandmother was the clerk treasurer of the town I grew up in, and visiting her at her office at the town hall. And there were paintings on her wall. And when I came in, I was like 5. And she said, "Do you like these paintings?" And I said, "Yeah, they were like landscapes." And she said, "Your dad made these." At this point, I had no idea that my dad had ever painted. He'd never talked about it. But then I saw these paintings. My dad is really gifted, naturally just gifted at painting. So they were like very realistic, beautiful renditions of landscapes. And I immediately, like, I had an explosion moment in my brain where I was like, wow, if my dad can do this, he doesn't even seem to think it's a big deal. Of course I could too. And it gave me this deep desire. And I think that continued through, like, as I got older and started visiting museums on trips and stuff in school, or just on my own, and seeing art in real life, just triggered some really deep desire in me. And that's never gone away. Yeah. I mean, I could talk a little bit too. You talked about prayer and the role of prayer.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. So for me, I like to, I mean, I demarcate morning and evening with prayer in my life, and that's been a big part of my life. before becoming Catholic, I converted in 2019. I was an Anglican for a long time and used the Book of Common Prayer, morning and evening prayer, as my one of my main devotion, main sources of prayer in my life, and that's continued. In converting into the Catholic Church, belong to what's called the ordinariate, for any of you liturgical nerds that would know what that is. But it's former Anglicans that have come into full communion with Rome, and so that's still a big part of my prayer life. The beauty of the language in that form of prayer, the translation of English prayers, is a huge source of inspiration for me. And I find myself thinking about the Psalms all the time, just coming into my head, because I've been praying them for years, and you sort of, repeat things, they just start to sink in. But huge part of my rhythm of my day.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And
Yeah, go ahead, Kara.
to continue on that question, I similarly, I feel like seeing work in person at museums. I remember as a teenager seeing Monet's giant Giverny paintings at MoMA. And that, for me, I was already, interested in art, and I grew up on Long Island, so I was able to get to the Met some, and but something about seeing those paintings, I was, just like floored me. And I mean, interestingly, I've worked through a variety of styles, but now I am kind of back at a more like impressionist mode of working. And then, it's hard with kids to get to galleries, to get to museums. So I must admit, a lot of my looking is online or in book reproductions, and I can get a hold of them. But the times I do get in to look at work in person, it really does re-energize and inspire. And yeah.
In relation to what you're all saying, I was remembering just what I was telling you right before we began this conversation, that the first time I went to the museum, the Prado Museum, I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. It was a school visit. So I remember the impression Velázquez made on me. I remember staring at one of his paintings and thinking, wow, if you can paint like this, then I want to become a painter. And I think you cannot escape all the art that has been going on for, previous to you. You've been seeing it since you opened your eyes, and you cannot escape that. And in prayer life, I think it works in a similar way. So you are part of a chain. So the faith is given to you, and you pass it on. So it's a good thing to be part of that chain, and it affects the way in which you create your art and the way in which you personally relate to God in your prayer life, I think.
I would say that an encounter that was very meaningful for me was not in person with this work, but I saw, when I was probably maybe 13 or 14, a reproduction of the Cairo page from the Lindisfarne Gospels, which is a illuminated manuscript from about year 700 or so, and just is incredibly intricate, and to this day I think is probably my favorite work of graphic art I've ever seen. And I think at that time I already had sort of an idea that I was an artist, but that to see a religious work of that sophistication, and it's interestingly, it wasn't one that's really showed like a picture of, there's no figures in this except for like, decorative animals, but something about that left such a strong impression. And there's a famous quote about these kinds of manuscripts from Gerald of Wales centuries later. He said, they're so intricate they look like they were made by an angel and not by a man. And I think my response to it was less like, oh, this is so impossible, but just like, how on earth do you do that? Because I know it was not made by an angel. We actually know who made it and when and where. We have a lot of art historical information about this particular
Oh, sorry. I think Daniel's frozen. Oh. So actually that might be a good segue. Sorry that Daniel got cut off there. Hopefully he can pop back on. But actually one of the questions in the Q&A I think relates really well to what Daniel's talking about, sort of this idea that it looks like it's made by angels and not by man, and sort of the immense like beauty and intricacy that's part of a sort of a work made by hand, right? I think Carrie, you also spoke to that idea as well. So Amanda in the Q&A is talking, and I think this is an interesting question because I feel like in the past I would have maybe inserted here a question about like, what do we make of like, particularly in religious artwork, of the sort of kitsch, right? The kind of really sort of saccharine sort of images that we can get. But I think actually a more important question possibly today in sort of the current environment is the role of AI and artificial intelligence and how that is affecting art. So she is asking, I'm seeing a number of images of Jesus emerging that have been created using AI apps made to look like watercolor paintings or airbrush works, for example, being used on church leaflets, bulletins, etc. And I'm interested to know what you all think of AI generated religious images. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a question. Obviously, it's a huge topic, but I think it's one that in some ways can't be avoided because of the fact that we are sort of focusing on the importance of the sort of handmade, right, and the sort of humanness of making and how important that is.
Who's going to go for it?
I know, right?
I'll start. Okay. But I think it's, I mean, making an image of Christ without a soul, it would be a strange thing to do, and I don't know how you would. So I don't know. There's a thought, random thought. But Carrie, you're going to say something.
Oh yeah, no, I just Googled this really fast because I was so curious what they look like. Because I hadn't actually heard of this. I mean, I feel like it's almost like the fulfillment of the kitsch. It's element. It's like I think I when it comes to sort of highly commercialized religious work, like I struggle looking at it, but then at the same time, I know it comes from such a place of sincerity for a lot of folks too. It's a little bit tricky, but this is like it's very kitschy, and it was made by a computer, so it's I understand it may be hard when it comes to church bulletins and things to distinguish this stuff, but I think like the incarnation is best manifested through like human hands, and certainly yeah, looking at these that doesn't have any sort of gravitas or yeah, it's like the most commercial. The one thing it points out, which I think is a little bit interesting, is they've used AI to with the Shroud of Turin to create like an image of what like the face on the Shroud of Turin of Christ could have looked like. So I think sometimes I hesitate to say new technology is bad, as problematic as it is, but it seems like it's being misused in ways. But then there are ways it could be used in an interesting capacity.
Could I jump in too? I think that there's this is making me think of just artistic training in general, and particularly for Christians who are wanting to make art that might be about their faith. And I suppose like for me personally, I've been especially timid about making explicitly liturgical or sacramental kind of imagery that's made for worship or devotion, mostly because there's been such a huge vacuum of it in the last 100 years. There's not much being made, and if you pop out and you make something, you're going to get a lot of like, and you know, like it's sort of, it just feels like being extremely vulnerable because it's not really happening. And I think personally, I've been scared to do it, if I can be honest, because I I sense this vacuum, and I really look up to people, like, or making explicit imagery, like images of Christ, or images out of Daniel and Matilde. You're both doing this explicitly, and I really look up to you because you're extremely brave, in my opinion, to do it. Because no one, who are you looking up to other than people who have died? And it's kind of sad. But in relation to training, what I was thinking about is that I think there's I would hope that young people would want to learn how to make these sort of images and not start relying on AI. And there are a lot of well-meaning young artists who are completely passionate about Christ and want to, like, share, and they just are so in love with Jesus and they want to share this, but they might not have a very robust set of skills developed yet. And I've noticed that as an issue, when you look at art that's being made. Like, it used to be, the best art was the art that the church commissioned, and now we're kind of maybe a little bit wanting, and all the good artists have sort of either left the faith or don't belong to any faith group. So what do you do with that? I don't know. I guess I'm just throwing that out there as some thoughts and open questions, but.
I apologize. My internet connection has been come and go for the last few minutes, so I think I missed part of the question. But if it's about sort of the appropriateness of this artificial intelligence generated imagery in a religious context, I think one of the major flaws, I think, with the way that people think about really everything, including art nowadays and in the modern world, where it's been a growing trend for a while, is that we reduce everything to data. We think that in order for a thing to have real existence, it has to be able to be quantified. We have to put numbers on it. We, sort of place things in this sort of, this grid. And we think that anything that can't be described by these tools must not exist. Full man with a hammer type of, idea again. To a man with a computer, everything looks like data. And that's kind of one of our major ways of interacting with the world. And what I see as the problem using something like a robot to generate imagery is that it cannot process anything that isn't data. That even if it's not making decisions using a will or an intellect, it's making decisions using probabilities and just weighing numerical on a fundamental level. It is dealing with a reduction of the world to numbers that it can process, and then it's processing them and putting it out. And we all know that, yes, when I look at this screen, we know that it's made up of a grid of pixels, and it looks kind of like I'm looking at these 5 different people right now. But we know that that's not what you people actually look like. On a fundamental level, you are not made up of pixels. And unless we have this sense that there is a reality underlying it that is more fundamental than our ability of than its ability to fool our senses into thinking it looks good enough, then I think we're losing something very important on a religious level, because the whole idea that a thing's substance, what it actually is and what it looks like and has the physical properties of, kind of underlies our entire religion. And so I think it's kind of important to maintain that idea in many realms as we can. And I certainly think in art, that's an important one. I mean, I also do think that the systems that they make now are basically premised on dishonest use of other people's work, which is kind of a different ethical issue. But even if it weren't, I still think the fundamental problem is there.
And what you said brought to mind, some folks have asked me about, what do you think of AI generated art? Do you think artists are going to be put out of business? I could tell the AI to make a Van Gogh style painting of this person, you guys are going to be out of business. And to me, I'm like, what disturbs me more is that they think that that AI generated image is as meaningful and beautiful as an actual painting. Like, I think what you're saying, Caleb, like there's a lack of study for artists pursuing religious subject matter, figurative subject matter, but also just in looking at art, having a basic understanding of art history and how materials come together and the substance of that. Like, I don't think we'd be worried about AI if like your average person was really able to distinguish immediately like the Van Gogh and the AI Van Gogh. But, you know.
Yes, I mean, I guess AI can also be used as a tool. I mean, not just as, you drop some words there and the computer makes up something. I guess you can also use it as you use Photoshop or you use other stuff. But I'm not afraid in that respect either. When people ask you, are you afraid about AI letting you without a job? And I say, well, I think the opposite will happen actually. And precisely because of all the things that we're talking about right now. So people will get to value more, or they will be willing to take material things before, like they will prefer that above the artificial generated images or whatever. I think it will cause the opposite effect, or at least that's what I hope for. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with that. I think that the more that humans are very quick to adapt, and they can pick out that this is made through artificial intelligence fairly quickly now, and they're going to, I think, I mean, just my wild guess is that people are going to have a deep desire and need and longing for authentic art, or even outside of art, just authentic imagery, that they know a photographer was behind the lens and took a photo, and there's some visual cues there to show them that, and it'll quickly be able to decipher, maybe, hopefully, that they'll be able to start finding ways to decipher that, because I do think that humans, I mean, for me, if I'm speaking for myself, really desire authenticity right now, and integrity, and things in general. And I think artists typically are like that, because we find deep meaning in these things that maybe not everyone does. And it's because you see the sort of depth to people who spend time making things and engaging with the world around them. They don't see the world as superficial. They see it as this sort of deeply meaningful thing that was created and designed and impossibly robust and beautiful, which, I think a lot of us find inspiration out of nature and just the world around us, and we're borrowing from our realities, and artificial intelligence is doing that, but the difference is we have a soul and artificial intelligence does not. So we have this sort of eternal thing that's inside of us, the soul, that once it's getting activated by other eternal truths, artificial intelligence could never replicate the human soul and the sort of depth of beauty there. So.
Yeah, and I think also, I think hopefully, right, well, even if people can't distinguish, I think sometimes it's that trickiness of like, not being able to distinguish, right, whether something is AI or not. But I think having these conversations are important, right, because I think just the fact that people might start thinking like, oh, okay, so there's AI generated art. Like, what does that mean about art? What is art? Why is it important that we have, human made art, and how do we seek that out? I think my hope is that, like, both on one side, I think that there's a need to make sure people that, are in fields of work where maybe AI generated art might kind of come in, even if it's a church bulletin, right? Making sure like people are pushing back against like, why would we do this when we have this tradition of art that we can pull from? But also on the flip side, hopefully sort of having more of these conversations and sort of exploring like, what is art, right? And like, why is it important that we, continue to sort of develop and promote, the making of art and the sort of human aspect of that. Yeah. So Daniel, I don't know if you wanted to hop in. I couldn't tell if you were going to say something else, but we're right about time. So I wanted to make sure you're good. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much to all of you. We're at time, so I want to make sure I honor everyone's schedules and things who joined us, and also all of you as panelists. Thank you so much for just being part of this and for being open to coming on and sort of exploring these questions and sharing your work. It really has been such a joy to be able to sort of connect on this level with you guys. Yeah, we wanted to just share real briefly. Collegium has obviously fewer online events now. So for those of you who aren't in the Philly area, we will be having a few more online events this year, including some more arts related ones in the spring. But for those here in the Northeast, we have an event coming up in early November. It's sort of a panel conversation about Christianity and the classical tradition and its role in American democracy. So I think the poster's coming up there. And then along with that, we also have another arts event, a workshop coming up on November 7th, Tuesday at 5 p.m., which will be a chance to sort of explore the art of seeing and sort of beauty in the everyday. So we'll be having a workshop with Marina Gross-Hoy, who's a museum researcher based out of Canada, who'll be joining us in person here in Philly to lead us in that as well. And then final thing before everyone leaves, we'll send this out in an email as well to all of you who have attended, but we have a promo code from Ignatius Press, who is one of our co-sponsors. So I'll type it into the chat here, but it's Gallery 25. So they have a really awesome new book that came out this year, highlighting, I think, about 8 or 9 contemporary Catholic artists, sort of along these lines, right, exploring different mediums and sort of really Daniel's, I sort of mentioning the sort of idea of being sort of tethered to tradition, but also the sort of very original approach as well. So I hope that you guys will check that out. And again, we'll email that out to everyone. So thank you again to all of you, and hopefully we'll have you guys join again in the future, and have a wonderful rest of your day. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.